right. Hello, everybody. I'm here doing my very, very first Facebook Live. Sorry, Substack Live. Scratch that with my colleague and dear friend, Austin Kocher, who is a Syracuse University professor with 15 years studying immigration. Maybe it's more now. I was taking this off your About page. Studying immigration law enforcement through public and private data sources, policy developments, and cutting edge research. He is the source for unbiased information on immigration and immigration law enforcement, and on a topic as divisive as immigration is today in the United States. He is a source you can trust. So if you're not a subscriber, go subscribe to Austin Coker today. Austin, I engorge myself on your stuff. On Near Daily, you are absolutely smashing it. On Substack, you must be working round the clock with Near Daily posts, which is, accelerated really since the inauguration of the latest regime. And I am just so grateful to you for all that you provide. I have so many questions. We have only 30 minutes. I'm going to ask, I want you to tell us about the Deportation Data Project and end with where you find hope and what you might suggest for strategies for resistance as we prepare for the onslaught. But let's start with the preparation for the onslaught. We, especially according to your data, we are up to 59,000 currently imprisoned in the ICE Gulag, and that's down from last month. If I read your analysis correctly, that's because of a bit of a stay in LA, which has now been lifted by the Supreme Court shadow docket. So we're at, more or less 60,000, somewhere in there, folks who are incarcerated in the Gulag on the eve of the new fiscal year, government fiscal year, in which ICE and CBP combined are going to be bequeathed a budget larger than almost every military in the world. The combined budget of ATF, DEA, FBI, Marshals Service, and the Bureau of Prisons combined. So it's going to get uglier, and it's already pretty ugly now. In fact, you probably recall that when Representative from Florida, Maxwell Frost, went to try to get into the Everglades concentration camp, I refused to use the moniker that the government has forced upon us, because it is, let's just use the words that let's call things for what they are. When he went there, he said, this is an ethnic cleansing. The United States is engaging in an ethnic cleansing of brown and Black people who may or may not have the appropriate piece of paper to live in the United States. And they're labeling folks as the worst of the worst when your data shows very conclusively that it is not. So that they are not, sorry, for the most part. What do you think about Maxwell Frost's statement that this is going toward ethnic cleansing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the scale of immigration enforcement and who is targeted and how people are targeted, as well as the administration's, I think, refusal to follow the law and to follow court decisions. I think what it means is that all of us who are working closely in this space are trying to figure out what the right language is to use and how to put this in historical context that doesn't make it seem like this is business as usual.
Yeah.
In some ways, there are parts of it which are business as usual and just haven't gotten as much attention. There's other parts that I think are a break from what Republicans and Democrats both have done in the past and represents a new era of cruelty. And I think it's I think all of us are trying to grasp. All of us who either speak or write for a living are trying to grasp with what the right language is to use to describe it, because it feels like we're in a different kind of era right now.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was working on my book, I wanted to use the G word, right? But my publisher would not allow me to do that. So instead, I borrowed um, a quote from Toni Morrison as my epitaph that basically says the final solution didn't happen overnight, right? It started with a first solution, then a second, then a third. The hop to the move toward a final solution is not a jump. I mean, is not a step; it's a leap, and it feels unfortunately like we're very very much there. Of course, it's a much different kind of potential ethnic cleansing than we're seeing, say, in Gaza, than we saw in Germany during the Holocaust. So it is hard to really find the words to frame it. Um, but this idea that the government is picking up and arresting the worst of the worst, I would reframe as the government is kidnapping people they are framing, they are claiming have criminal backgrounds, and we know that that just isn't the case. Can you speak to that statement as it comes out in your data?
Sure. So, ICE keeps track of people's criminal backgrounds, their interactions with the criminal legal system in some way, or the immigration system in the past. So, there is data that we can look at on a case by case basis to say, does this person have criminal charges or convictions? The easiest way to do that is ICE regularly reports not specific charges, but generally, does someone have any criminal conviction, any criminal charge, or nothing other than a alleged immigration violation? So those are the three categories. That's sort of the easiest way to track over time. What percentage of each of those groups are reflected in ICE arrests, detention, and deportation. I mean, I would say that because we know that our criminal legal system has many problems and flaws and biases built into it, it's not as if, and I think the legacy of criminal enforcement is not exclusively punitive. It's also rehabilitative in the sense that people make mistakes and do bad things, and people pay certain consequences for that. But the idea is that we want a safe society, not a punitive society. And so a criminal conviction or charge by itself shouldn't end a person's life. Of course, people should have a chance to live the rest of their life. And there's many people in government office today who have criminal charges and convictions on their records.
Yep.
And they are leading major agencies and serving in the White House.
Right.
So clearly, criminal charge or conviction is not disqualifying for an entire person's life. However, in the immigration system, when we look at that data, just in terms of the numbers, we see that the group that has grown the most over the Trump administration are people who have no criminal charges or convictions, but just have immigration violations on their record of some kind. We also don't know, for those people who do have charges or convictions, we don't know how serious they are.
Right.
So, again, people have a lot of different views on this, of course. But most Americans, I think, uh, you know, j- understand that having, a murder charge or a violent crime on someone's record is very different than having, a few speeding tickets or a shoplifting charge. Most Americans make a distinction, and that we looking at the data, we can't differentiate that. So even when we
Hmm.
say that there are a lot of people with criminal charges or convictions, we can't, a very small percent actually have something that would come close to what most Americans would consider a violent charge. So we've seen that, we've seen all the numbers go up in terms of arrests and detentions, but the group that's grown the most are people with no criminal history at all. And in fact, there was a spike of arrests at the end of May and into June. ICE went out in force, especially in Southern California, especially in Los Angeles. But also, what's been a little underreported on is actually Texas and Florida both have had more ICE arrests in those states than California. ICE arrests have been the most publicized and sort of the most aggressive and the most concentrated in Southern California. So there's been a lot of reporting on that. But actually, Texas and Florida have more. And if you want to look at the data on this, you can go to enforcement-dashboard.com. We just released this tool today. You can look at those arrests for yourselves. But during that spike in arrests, that was the entire spike of arrests in May and June was driven by immigrants who did not have any criminal. Literally, if you look at the line, the total number of arrests made for people with criminal convictions did not change. It was flat. The total number of arrests of people with criminal charges on their record, it was completely flat, no change. The line that changed was those immigrants who had only, civil immigration violations of some kind. That's the line that spiked in May and June,
Hmm.
and drove those arrests. So pretty astonishing and pretty unambiguous.
Really, 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 really good data. It does occur to me, though, as I write in chapter 15 of Crossing the Line, that going back to the Clinton era, well, starting in Reagan and then up through into the Clinton era, we had this designation of aggravated felon that just kept getting added to and added to and added to and added to, such that folks without documentation can have what would be a misdemeanor crime for you and me
Hmm.
spun into a criminal
Hmm.
conviction for which they typically pay maybe twice, sometimes three times, first in the prison, state or federal prison of their alleged offense, and then under ICE, and then through deportation. So, and I wanted to ask you, do your data account for that, or are we just looking at what ICE deems to be criminal, even though they may not be. They may have been fallen under these laws dating back to the 1990s, in particular IRA, which I write about in chapter 15. Um, so, in though you are looking at data and being as unbiased in your analysis of the data as you possibly can, is it possible that the data that is coming through to you is already biased and problematic?
Well, in a sense, all of the data that we get directly from the agencies has, you know, uh, uh, parts of it which it makes some things visible and it makes other things invisible, and that's sort of the nature of all data in that sense.
Hmm.
When it specifically comes to the nuances of um, the line between what's criminal and not, there is a distinction between a criminal conviction for immigration purposes and a criminal conviction uh, typically understood in the criminal legal system. So, just to give everyone in the room like an example, it's common in the criminal legal system for folks to either plea down on charges or to be put into a what's called a diversion program, which basically means a person admits that they did what they were charged for doing,
Hmm.
but instead of going through the process and admitting guilt in court and receiving a criminal conviction on their record, the legal system will, quote, divert that person into some other kind of program. It could be a rehabilitation, it could be some sort of rehab program. It could be, if it was substance abuse, alcohol abuse related, it could be a kind of recovery program. Again, this is the rehabilitative part of our legal system, so that those individuals won't have that stain on their record for the rest of their lives. For immigration purposes, any kind of admission, any kind of agreement that any person comes to within the legal system, where that person admitted appear to admit culpability or responsibility for anything, can be considered a conviction for immigration purposes. So there are a lot of people who may be in that situation, and trying to understand precisely how many people that applies to is difficult
Hmm.
because you know, yeah, every agency, every government agency has their own data systems, and they don't all speak to each other. So, what might
Right.
be on someone's record in a courthouse here in Baltimore, where I sit, doesn't mean that everything in that person's record will make it into ICE's data. So, it just makes it really difficult on a grand scale to try to do it. But I mean, you're absolutely right, and I think this is where this is a good example of the limits of quantitative social science data research. Is, what we try to do as social scientists, I'm a geographer myself, is we try to look at the data that's there, but then we also try to say, okay, what kind of questions can we not answer with the data? And that
Hmm.
means talking to attorneys, talking to people in the system, going back and doing legal research and archival research to try to unpack some sample cases to say, hey, here's actually the full story. So yeah, it's a great observation, Sarah, and I appreciate you, bringing everyone's attention to that.
Yeah, I think that's something that's missed, right? They can very easily
Mhm,
pull the wool over everybody's eyes by saying these are criminal offenders, when in fact, even during the Obama administration, they were not. The
mhm,
we're only deporting felons, not friends, also crossed that line often when
mhm,
you got down into the weeds. And now we have an administration that's just looking for any excuse. So they're coming up with an arrest of a guy 30 years before or a gal 30 years before for, marijuana possession, and
mhm.
turning that into a deportable crime. Um,
That's right.
and sometimes sending them to places really never knew.
Mhm.
In the case of our DACA recipients who have never been offered a path to citizenship. So let's switch to your post today, your deportation data project. What is your relationship to the deportation data project? And so, for those of you who haven't heard about it yet, you can read about it on Austin's Substack today. It's an open source analysis and public accountability, and it is really coming out at such a crucial time because we're, immigration enforcement has been intensified, and we're about to see it just explode beyond the beyond. And of course, I want to talk to you about that too. But let's proceed that with this project. Who's involved? What it's giving us? What are we doing here?
Sure. So the Deportation Data Project, founded by David Hausman out at Berkeley, is a small uh, project where they use Freedom of Information Act requests and litigation to make immigration data available to the public. I would encourage everyone to check it out, bookmark it. It's deportationdata.org.
Hmm.
This is a strategy that many of us in the immigration data world have used for a very long time, decades, in fact. So the strategy itself is not necessarily new. What's new is that rather than getting the data and sort of holding on to it, and also instead of going after just little bits of data, they really are going after comprehensive immigration data from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and then they're making that data and the entire data sets freely available to the public to use for whatever purposes the public would like to use it for. So it's in many ways it's a real democratization of immigration data on a scale that we've never seen before, which is super exciting for me as a researcher who also gets a lot of data through Freedom of Information Act requests. The issue is actually, this is just my pitch for the value of Deportation Data Project. Most people don't really understand that to really get the granularity and the detail of data that we need to do this kind of research and to monitor and hold agencies accountable, it really does require litigation. So it's not just having specialized understandings of the federal government's data systems, which is crucial, understanding the FOIA process, but also having the resources and the legal capacity to litigate. That's expensive. It takes a lot of time, all of that.
Mm.
And so really their niche lever point is being able to write good FOIA requests and then do the actual litigation, which I'm not an attorney. I don't do direct litigation in that way. I've
Hmm.
always had to partner with people. So that's really, really valuable. The issue is the size of the data sets that we're looking at. The smallest data set is 700,000 records, which you can open in an Excel file, but it's clunky and slow because it's a lot of records. The other records are well over a million records just for the most recent release. And if you combine them with longer historical data, you're looking at several million records. So to do the data analysis at that point, at that scale, requires technical infrastructure. You need the right software. You need, all of that. You really need to understand data science and understand immigration data sets, which is even people who are data scientists may not understand the uniqueness of what government administrative data sets look like. And then you have to have domain area expertise. So you have to understand how the immigration system works to make sense of the data. And I guess I would say a fourth thing is you also have to do enough public communication to understand what the public and what reporters and what policymakers really want to see. There's a lot of things that I find really interesting, much more interesting than the basic numbers that most people want, because it tells me a lot more about how the government works, and it's interesting and it's nuanced and it's complicated. But that's not interesting to most people. Because
Hmm.
I do a lot of public communication and I get so many of the questions, over time you sort of go, okay, this is what people are looking for. Let's find a way to just give people exactly what they want without confusing them. So here's the challenge. Deportation Data Project has put out all this incredible data. People are working with it, but people have questions. The data sets are large. And so there's been a discussion for several months now. How do we make this more accessible? How do we build some kind of dashboard or something like that? And I've been there's a bunch of different groups who have had this conversation. Again, not everybody has that combination of the fundamentals that you need. So basically, I decided, hey, let me see if we can do this through Relevant Research, which is a research firm that I have. Let's see if we can do. Let's see how much work this is. We don't have any funding for this or anything. Let's just give this a shot. And we actually came up with what we think is a really very simple, very straightforward, elegant solution that starts to make the data available publicly. And we think we feel good about being able to maintain it and share it and make it accessible to people. And so we launched that today. The traffic on the website is already quite high. So we're already, okay, we're going to have to scale this a little bit, because it's a lot of interaction with a lot of data, a lot of records online, but we're going to make it work. And so, yeah, it's just a way to say, look, this is going to answer probably 80% of the questions that I get every single day. This dashboard is going to answer 80% of them. There's still another 20% that people want more nuanced analysis. They have more specific questions. That's fine. But we hope people will check it out. Again, it's at enforcementdashboard.com and see what you think.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you so much for getting behind that. Is there links? I mean, I know from your description it is linked to track data. Is it also linked to the project that Tom Cartwright started that is now been taken over by Human Rights First? It's called the Flight Tracking Project.
Yeah, so I mean, Track, the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse that used to be at Syracuse University. I used to work there when it was at Syracuse University. It's now chosen to leave the university and be independent.
Hmm,
That
I
data
didn't know
all
that.
just comes, yeah, that data is just all through FOIA request and litigation. That's all that
Okay.
is.
Okay.
So it's not linked to Track data directly in some way. It's just, this is kind of how you do the work, and there's different people kind of working in that same field, generally speaking. And Tom's project is a little bit different. Tom Cartwright has been tracking deportation flights for several years, as you well know, Sarah.
Hmm.
He's recently gotten out of the business and
Yeah.
transferred it over to Human Rights First. And that project's different in the sense that he's not getting data from the government through public records requests, although I know
Right.
he has sent in some requests before. He's using what I would describe as OSINT, or open source intelligence methods, to track
Hmm.
these flights. So he's using flight tracker information that's in the public domain to identify those flights that are deportation flights, and then document metadata about them and make it available to the public. So a little bit different, but we all share a common purpose, which is, and a common methodology, which is trying to make data available as objective as possible for agencies that are not very interested in being transparent.
Right. Right. Okay, wonderful. What give me full definition of the acronym you used, OSINT?
OSINT, it's Open Source Intelligent, OSINT.
Ah,
It's a
got it.
methodology that has been around for a while, but it's been popularized by groups like Bellingcat and others who, and uh, uh, um, uh, the Forensic Architecture Group,
Right,
led by A.L. Weissman at the
right.
in London for years. He's now in Canada. But the idea is, there's so much information in the public domain when you combine social media, news accounts, live stream cameras, videos, TikTok videos. If you put all that information together,
Mhm,
you can actually develop quite granular stories about what's going on. And really, the most, the reason that Tom's, project is so interesting in that regard, such a good example. I mean, the place where OSINT has been most impactful in the past few years has been the war in Ukraine.
mhm.
So documenting human rights abuses from the Russian military in Ukraine and documenting the movement of Russian troops in and out, as well as Ukrainian troops as
Right.
well. There's been tremendous work on that to show, again, really massive human rights violations. And as I said, because forensic architectures, A.L. Weissman's group, A.L. Weissman's start before there was forensic architectures, he was doing work in Israel Palestine. So his early work was actually on documenting these kinds of abuses there. So it goes back to Gaza, actually.
Wow, yeah, and it sounds like that's actually sort of what I did with with my research without knowing it for crossing the line. All right, we've got just a few minutes left, and I'm really, really grateful for your time because I know you
Of
are
course.
one of the busiest people out there. But I wanted to ask two questions if you can slam them
Sure.
into 3 minutes. The first is, in asking you to divine with the 14 times budget increase that ICE is about to enjoy and the 4 times budget increase that CBP is about to enjoy, how much worse is it going to get? How much worse is it going to get? And simultaneously, where do you find hope? And what can you suggest those of us who can, those of us who are still able to be on the front lines and say no to the coming onslaught, where do you find hope and what do you suggest we continue to do to stand up for our rights and the rights of our undocumented brothers and sisters?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the massive budget increase is going to mean everything that we're seeing now is going to, double, triple, and quadruple over the next 12 months. So it's going to get more difficult and it will get darker rather than lighter and easier. I think the detention infrastructure in particular is going to expand to a scale I think that's difficult to imagine at this point.
Yeah,
Already, at the start of the Trump administration, there were 135 287G agreements, which allow local law enforcement agencies to do immigration enforcement. There's now over 1,000.
over a
Uh,
thousand. Yeah.
yeah, it's just enormous. I've written about that on Substack as well, and it's just
Hmm.
again, it's astronomical. I think we're going to see something with detention as well. We're going to see it really grow. Thomas Homan said he wants to get to 100,000 people in detention. I think he's going to do it.
Yeah.
Um, so that's going to be massive. I think when it comes to hope, I've found a lot of hope recently in the work of, friends like Ashley de Acevedo, who runs American Families United.
Yeah.
This is an organization that, advocates and supports spouses of immigrants who are either facing deportation or could be deported, or now increasingly,
Have been.
people who have left the
Hmm.
country.
Yep.
So if you're not
That's
familiar with
American Friends United. Yeah.
American Families
American
United.
Families United. Yes.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone here to check out Ashley de Acevedo and follow their work. I think there's tremendous power in women showing up and saying, women of faith, working women, women of no faith, across the spectrum. But just the fact that women show up, supporting each other, support many, not all, but many of these people, many of the US citizens whose spouses are facing deeper, many of them are women, and again, they show up, they support each other, For many of them, even after some of their husbands have had the good fortune of getting legal status, they stay involved. Like Heather Gonzalez has stayed involved for a long time and
Hmm.
continues to advocate because they believe in that work. So I think, if anyone's looking for hope, that's definitely a place where I have found some hope, Sarah.
Well, we can add to that the Women's Refugee Commission's latest pregnancy tracker. How do they call it?
Yes.
I can't remember
Yeah, the detention pregnancy tracker. That's
that
also
one.
something that my group put together for them. And the Women's Refugee Commission it's the only national group specifically with the mission of supporting immigrant women and refugees. And with the growth of arrests and detention, more pregnant women are in detention, and many of them are losing babies. They're miscarrying in detention because of malnourishment and stress and all of, poor medical care. And so if you're out there and you are aware of someone who is pregnant and is arrested by ICE or is or was in ICE custody, please go to detentionpregnancytracker.com and let them know. That would be really helpful. They're really trying to understand the full scope of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for all that you do and for giving us your time today. I hope we can do this again real soon.
Yes,
And
absolutely,
everybody
Sarah. Thanks
follow
for all your work.
Austin. Yeah, thank you. I'll be back out on tour soon. Hopefully, I'll get to Baltimore. I'll keep you posted.
Please do. Hey, it's great talking with you, Sarah, as always.
As
Thanks, everyone.
always, have a great day. Bye, all.